here. You are live. Hello, hello, all you beautiful people. Thank you
Uh,
for your patience as we work through some of these technical issues. Uh, your feedback is appreciated. Please let us know if there's any issues on your end with audio quality, video quality, etc., etc. We are playing with some new software.
yeah, new
Uh,
software and trying to share the burden. There we go.
all
Thank you,
right.
Christine.
Thank you for that feedback. So let's get this party started. Hello and welcome to Geek on My Sleeve. For those of you new to the channel, my name is Carl and my co-host is Peter.
Hello.
And today we will be doing Geek Out session number 12, where we will be doing a live discussion of We Are Legion, We Are Bob, Bobiverse Book 1. Now, with that
Or
being
by
said,
Dennis E. Taylor.
yes, thank you, by Dennis E. Taylor. Um, this is going to be a spoiler filled discussion. So if you are interested in checking out the book, highly recommend it. We have a spoiler free review up on our channel that we highly recommend you check out and go pick up the book. And all of our Geek Out streams are archived on our YouTube page. So you could always come back and watch this later and join the conversation afterwards in the comments below. And yeah. How you
Yeah,
doing today, Pete?
I'm doing well. Doing well. It's long work week, but this is
Mm,
something that I enjoy, so I'm glad I'm here.
yes. Enjoyable type of work, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Uh, Bobiverse Book One. What are your
Main
thoughts?
character dies, story's over. Yeah, that's so.
I'm
Uh,
noticing a trend with the books we pick.
yeah.
A lot of main characters dying.
At the last review we did, or the one last weekend, the character died at the end of the book. For this one,
Hmm.
the character dies like chapter one, but it does really well. So
Yeah.
the way that it has an average Joe and runs a software company and gets this huge windfall, someone buys him out, and then he ends up spending money on Cryo Eterna, and
Hmm.
shortly after dies. Um, yeah, and for him learning how to be a replicant, it's weird for me because it's kind of like a dream and a nightmare.
Yeah.
Because I do a lot of the Sword Art Online or all our lit RPGs where they get trapped in a game.
Hmm.
But for me, the closest thing I could think of is in season two of Sword Art, where they have people with serious medical complications who essentially
Hmm.
live their whole life through dive or through the
Hmm.
full immersion.
Hmm.
But, all those constraints at the beginning.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're getting way ahead. The the first couple chapters, he we get introduced to Bob 1.0, right? He's running around using meatware, right? And I think you're right, like end of first chapter, maybe first couple chapters, he dies. But in the very beginning, it pretty much opens up with, so you're going to cut my head off. And that's like the opening line. Like, if that doesn't catch your attention, I'm not sure what will. But yeah, this book asks a lot of good philosophical questions. Like, if money wasn't an issue, would you freeze your own brain for the hope of, in the future, medical technology catches up to where they could pretty much fix your body or completely make you a new one, um, and then kind of have a second life 2.0. And I'm really curious to hear what the viewers think about that if they would freeze themselves for a chance at a 2.0. And I'm trying to think, I meant to look it up beforehand, but I know there's a number of famous celebrities that have already done that. I think
Well,
maybe somebody else can answer this. Is Walt Disney one of them? Is he on ice?
that'd
Um,
be pretty snazzy. The only I would be interested if financially it made sense, but for me, I'm just picturing it being like the whole nanobots bit where they're like, "Oh yeah, sci-fi nanobots, they do everything." And it's like, "Oh, just kidding, it's 3D printers." And for me to
yeah.
like be on ice and be ready for that revive or, hoping it's all
Mhm.
going to work out and them to be like, yeah, so really, we've got to connect these electrodes that, stimulate activity to keep it going. Since it
Mhm.
froze, all that liquid in your brain, shot out everywhere. And yeah, ice expands, or things
Yeah.
expand when you freeze them. So it would be
Uh,
pretty cool for me, but I also see it going horribly wrong.
so I'm not sure on our viewers' end, but your sound seems to be fluctuating.
Yeah,
Um,
spiking real high and low.
yeah, we're going to keep powering through. If you guys could let us know on your end if it's still bearable, we'd appreciate it. But yeah, so getting some feedback about Pete's volume fluctuating. We will see what we can do on our end. Um, but yeah, I think I'd freeze my brain if money wasn't an issue. If I was like Bob, where I became a millionaire overnight, and there was that chance of you know being revived and seeing the world 100, 200 years later, that alone I think would be worth it to me. Um, but yeah, we see in the book with Bob that it doesn't work as intended, right? Like he was thinking that the analogy he uses, and Dennis E. Taylor just packs this book full of sci-fi references, but when he revives and he's talking to drawing a blank on what's the doctor's last name?
Oh,
I want to say,
Landberg?
yeah, Lamberg sounds right. But he's talking to him. He's like, he's going through and trying to figure things out about, um, you know, oh, it's not my real voice. Oh, I don't have head neck movement. How much of me is Borg from Star Trek, and how much of me is human? And Dr.
He's
Landers is like, let me check my Star Wars or my Star Trek trivia, but I think Mr. Data is a better comparison here than Borg, because he's not revived. He's just a copy of Bob, right? And they have to go through and use all these chemicals to where they pretty much thaw out his brain, pump it through of chemicals and all this other stuff to where
they can
he's not
record
Bob. He's
his
just a copy of Bob. Um, and I think that changes it a little bit for me, but all things considered, I'd probably still do it. To know that there was a copy of myself out there in the future, um, still making choices based off my values and actions and so on and so forth. What do you think, Pete?
I think I would want to just because of the opportunity. Um, you never know what it's going to be, but kind of like as soon as he becomes a replicant, he's faced with varying situations where he's like, oh, so I'm going to run a garbage truck. Like, that would suck. And
Right.
we get the little laugh from seeing a CEO or some other person who's made
Mm-hmm.
a lot of money in their life. If Walt Disney ends up, running a
Yeah.
garbage truck, that would just suck.
Yeah.
And even without that aspect, like all the things they have him doing, and it's ironic enough that he was just at the Vegas convention for von Neumann probes and other exploring the galaxy things, and then now he's
Hmm.
actually one. Like that would be a
Yes.
dream. And for me, if I had my dream of like shit hit the fan, you died, and then I'm brought back, it would be kind of like a life reset
Mm.
where they have the artificial intelligence that is running the game and creating the
Oh
environment
yeah.
and adjusting parameters, and like anything is doable, anything is possible there,
Hmm.
but it's you have to apply it first. You have to say, "Hey, I want to do this," and then the AI, or if I was it, would be able to critique and evolve and build my own world while
Hmm.
incorporating other people. So,
That would be pretty awesome. I wouldn't mind being brought back to run an MMO or whatnot, be the puppet master, if you will, for a video game. But yeah, I don't know if I would want to have my second existence be in charge of running a garbage truck or whatnot. And in the book, they do talk about that, about how most of the people who could afford the
the freezing of the
cryo
brain are
eterna,
pretty well off or
yeah.
wealthy.
You think you can spike your volume a little bit on your end, Pete? When it
Uh,
goes to the lows, I'm
so
having
I've
trouble
got it
hearing you.
capped out, but
Okay.
I also have it kind of pointing away from me. Um, the reason is for all the plosives and P buttons. I think my problem is just that I have it plugged into a different port and it's got
Okay.
different voltage for it.
We'll just keep going through and
Yeah,
geeking
sorry
out
about
over
that.
Bobiverse. If it gets to be too much, guys, just let us know in the chat. While we're taking a breather, if you guys could smash the like button, that helps the algorithm out for people to discover us and join the chat. And yeah,
Okay,
keep
so breaking buttons, I swapped the input. I've got a couple spikes. Sorry, everybody,
you're good.
but it
You're good.
seems to be a little bit. Yeah.
That's fine. Just we'll keep working through it. Um, but yeah, it does a good job setting up the story, right? We get the convention where they pretty much describe the von Neumann probe and how that would work, and it's in our current time, doing a bit of speculation, and then Bob dies and ends 1.0. We come back to 2.0, and I want to say it's over 100 years, but it's like 117, 120-year time hop. And at that point, while technology has advanced in a lot of ways, it hasn't really advanced in a lot of the theoretical side of technology. And part of that is because as the governments change, they go to trying to think of the right word, a theocracy, where it's pretty much all religion based, and anything that contradicts, any science that contradicts the religion gets suppressed. So when he wakes up, he dies an atheist. He talks about being a humanist, and then he's pretty much working for faith um, company or whatnot, where his job is to go and replicate and colonize space, right?
Yeah. So it's just you see it happen several times throughout the book where we are our own worst enemy.
Yeah.
Because, the day and age, he starts off in it's so and so so, but then because of the overly religious context and the control they get, they bring everything to a standstill. and
Mm-hmm.
then after skipping forward a little bit, after he gets off on his own doing his von Neumann probe thing and comes
Mm-hmm.
back, yeah, they pretty much about killed themselves off.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something I enjoy about sci-fi, right? It really goes through and explores the what ifs. And like what if we go down this path where things get out of control, and they talk about within the time hop there was quote World War III, but within the storyline once we get into 2.0, Bob, as he takes off to go explore the world, and we get through all the training, and I really appreciate how Dennis E. Taylor progresses the story and uses Landers to kind of fill in some of the details. And through that training, we get exposure to how the technology works and the roamers and the 3D printers and all that. But when he launches, it really starts, quote, World War IV, right? Where, um, it just
Yeah,
radioactive
they're all
clouds.
flexing, and
Yeah.
so it kind of revolves around um, oh the device that pushes at space to move.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Anyway, I can't think of the name of it. They find space travel.
And cheap fusion
Yeah,
energy,
cheap
right?
fusion energy, and now it goes more from a controlling and oh no, I'm right to we could colonize the stars. Like we could really do something more, and so everybody's kind of running their own probe projects, which
Mm-hmm. I
it,
think there's at least five other quote unquote countries, right?
yeah,
All
yeah.
running their own probe projects, and um, four out of the five do what Faith did with Bob, where they pretty much copy a human brain. And the fifth one, I believe it's the Chinese, do completely AI, if I'm remembering it right,
I
which
forget
has
what
some
it's
downsides.
called. Is it like
Yeah.
Amy? No, I don't know. Anyway, they've got the replicant, and then they have a automated system, which comes in great help because Bob ends
Hmm.
up using a lot of them.
Hmm.
Or AMI? Yeah,
AMI.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So he's and so main character dies. We go from one to two,
yeah. Hmm.
and then with all the BS of the social standing, he dies again, where his
Hmm.
main replicant core that he's in gets attacked. That spot kind of stood out for me
Hmm.
because there's an explosion, something happens. Landers is like, "Hey, Bob, stay here," and he starts going through this inner dialogue where he's like, "Stay here, stay here. I'm not even in this room," and so he pops out the window, uses his
Right.
roamers to go help defend him, and
Right.
then they're all like, where's Landers? What's going on here?" And he goes back. After all that, he gets one roamer free because all
Right.
of his roamers are shot up. Um, he ends up taking one of them and finding the cubes and finding where
Hmm.
he actually is. And for that, there's a spot the book doesn't say, but so he finds where the replicant matrices are, and
Hmm.
then he gets shut off. And then when he comes back, it's several days later, and they're like,
Hmm.
"Oh, hey, someone took out your cores. We had to bring in a spare. We had to reset you."
Right.
In my mind, it was one of the people who are not friendly or whatnot. They're in faith, but they're not friendly because Landers
Right.
has control of all his roamers where he can turn them on or off. And Bob
Oh.
went through and found it. Someone decided, hey, we can now see where
Mm.
this roamer's at. We're going to blow it up.
Yeah, that's an interesting take on it. I didn't think that or think about that. Um, but yeah, my mind, like you said, they're more fearful of Bob than they were of the
Tactical
other
news.
faction attacking them.
Oh yeah.
Security was, and that's because supposedly there was a nuke or whatever, a pocket nuke inside the facility. And yeah, there's a lot of that internal faction stuff as well. Not only do they have to worry about external forces, there's so many different factions within faith that are either pro or against, right? And we get to see a little bit of that earlier on. Where my mind went with that part was, like he's constantly battling with his sense of self, right?
Yeah.
Because they say that there's an 80% failure rate for bringing up replicants, right? So
Yeah.
like four out of
Replicants to go
five
insane.
go insane. And that's that constant battle, and he's constantly asking himself, who am I? Like my sense of self, right? Like am I quote human, a person? Like am I alive? Am I just you know um
Yeah, and the Dennis does well kind of describing that because he
mhm,
references several other people, and the big one that stuck
mhm.
with me there was fire. Fire has all the signs of life, but it's not
Yeah,
alive. It's all about
right,
data, and the 500th bacteria will evolve differently or do different
right,
things, but the 500th fire will do the same thing
right. Act in the
regardless.
same way. So taking in information and acting on it. Um, but yeah, like I thought it was pretty interesting. Bob is constantly, you know, revisiting this concept, and before he even takes off, um, he he's not even the original replicant, right? Because they have to use the spare matrices from the ship. So like when he takes off and goes and explores, um, he is a copy of a copy of a copy at that point. Um,
Well, that's a whole separate string that I want to get into here, but Rick Orna, I'm sorry, I
mm,
probably butchered the name. Probably that old concept of rampancy AI sinking themselves to death, and they kind of brush on that where
mm,
the time sense, because Landers is saying, hey, while you're interacting with me, you interact at a normal time sense, but as soon as you get left to your own devices, you kind of amplify or you can view it at different senses. And
mm,
so that's something that we talk about in our other Geek Outs where we enjoy being able to do that and adjust our speeds. Where the best depiction Dennis does for that is right as he's launching. So he gets into the space probe. They had the explosion where, gonna boot him up and have him in the space probe. And the way he transitions between things, and he talks
mm,
about, oh, well, he's talking to StatCom or whatever for the official Baffle Gabs. And it just the scene is done beautifully because he keeps his sanity intact by making the guy speaking to him sound like an irate squirrel. And as soon as
yes,
he's done, he's doing all this research, and you get
yes.
that scene where he sets up the interrupt, and then you get missiles, and he's like, you know, by the time the guy said missiles, he's already like thought a couple sentences down the road where ways in which missiles is a good thing. Nope, can't think of
Right,
anything, and so he starts moving and maneuvering, and
right.
then he goes back to his dive and everything else, and yeah. Anyway, the scene for the launch of Bob is probably the best, like time hoppy, where he keeps transitioning in and out of like real time to
Hmm.
accelerated time. Yeah, I was that, and then that's also where really for me, it goes from kind of like a nightmare to a dream when Bob finally leaves and he sets up his VR
Mm-hmm.
and gets rid of all the imperatives to obey faith orders and, the dynamite or explodey stuff holding the world
Yeah,
together by
yeah,
duct tape.
and again, it comes back to some of those good philosophical questions that I enjoy from the book, right? Because he creates the VR and he sets up the sandbox, but in that sandbox, he's making a copy of himself, right? The same way that he is a copy and he's running these codes. So like, is he murdering himself or is he murdering somebody else when he does that? Um, I don't know. I'm curious to hear some other people's thoughts and what your thoughts on that, Pete, because like obviously he has to protect himself, right, and get rid of those,
Yeah,
but
I didn't
he,
I didn't really think about that when I was thinking about the sandbox.
mm-hmm,
I
because it's a copy of him, right, and he runs the
I was
code and
more
he keeps editing
focused.
it and pulling it out,
Uh,
um, cleaning it up. And in a sense, he goes through several iterations where he fails to get it all.
yeah.
Um, so is he literally just sitting there and murdering his later in the series they refer to it as yeah, I agree with Rick. It kind of glossed over that. Um, but later, you go a couple chapters when Will Riker and Homer take off, and it's Bill and Garfield, I believe, and they're kind of talking about like children, how do they survive, not parents survive not just eating their young and everything. Um, let's see. Rick says Sandbox Bob seems to be really glossed over because he is either killing a clone or Bob somehow knows how to selectively edit sapiens out of his clone, which
Well,
raises all sort of questions. I
so
agree.
the only thing I guess that brings up the point of like the replicant matrices is takes so much memory and so much information and whatnot that he could not include a full clone. So it's only select
Mm-hmm.
elements because
Okay.
the space and the data and everything that he's in currently is it's hard enough to do, but for the
Yeah.
sandbox, there's got to be a piece of him in there, which kind of
Mm-hmm.
brings me back around to what you were saying earlier, where every time Bob makes clones or makes the next cohort of people, there's
Copies of
that
himself.
environmental pressure where they seem to be more so focused on like what's around them or what they're doing or what their
Mm-hmm.
task is, and
Mm-hmm.
it seems to diverge more and more each time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Rick is right. Like they're the Sandbox Bob. Um, I felt like it was important for the story, but it definitely raises a lot of questions about how that all works out. Um, and yeah, I know we want to keep spoilers only to the first book, but you can see Dennis's progression as an author as the books continue, and he seems to kind of flesh out the ideas. I know he has two more in the pipeline, and I'm curious to see, you know, the difference there and how much more developed some of these other elements of the stories get. Um, but yeah, yeah.
So Bob's out in space. We just got launched. We built the VR.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have the Brazilian probe that comes in, and
Yes.
another piece of like, who am I in humanity? He goes through, and the first time he finds the endocrine controls, and
Mm-hmm.
he's like, I want to turn these off, but, I'm not quite there yet. And then he turns them off, and that's when he's like, okay, I am really human. There's no
Hmm.
question about it.
He
um,
still has those feels, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah,
I enjoy
yeah.
the way he says, in engineering terms, what is the metric of bobhood?
Mm,
Yeah, like
yeah,
the stuff that makes Bob different from a squirrel are still there, but
right, right. Um, yeah, yeah. The VR, I think, is very crucial too for him to help keep his sanity, right?
yeah,
Not to jump around too much, but we know that the Brazilian guys are obviously more military, and when they interact with Bob, they don't display any VR. It's just the Brazilian flag. And later on, when we run into the Australian probe, you know, he just completely snaps, right? Because we're so used to all this sensory input, right, as humans, to go from, having that your whole life to completely nothing. Um, no wonder so many of them go insane. Um, Not to mention all the other elements that play into that. But yeah, it's interesting how the different Bobs diverge into different people, right? And again, it comes back to those interesting philosophical questions. They explain it early on as, maybe
or
quantum
quantum effects.
differences.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's just hand
yeah.
waving for the hardware.
I was
But
about to say,
I also like the fact that they revisit it and they're like, well, I guess my parents would have seen me in any of them. Like how Mario, so, anytime he gets in a situation that he's not comfortable with, he clams up like that. Maybe not to that extent, but it's kind of like taking a feeling or how you react to one thing and doing it for everything. I don't
okay, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Another point kind of along that thought train is, like we, like there's the differences in the Bobs to begin with, but like we are a collection of our experiences,
know.
right? So like as they diverge and go through and have um, all these different experiences, allows them to kind of branch and change and develop. And there's just so much potential there, I think, for books 4 and 5 because time wise, like we have a number of time hops, and then just the difference between relative relative relativistic time, excuse me, as they travel, and then Bob's perceived time. Like you could easily get several hundreds of years of experience um, to diverge, right? Because I think when Bob dies, Bob 1.0, he's in his early 30s, I believe.
Yeah.
And then if you look at it, like some of these characters by the end of book one, um, through their experience, he's still very much, I guess, maybe um, the mindset of 30s, but like some of those guys, I think are approaching close to 100 years of experience, right?
Yeah, from their
Because I
time.
think was it it's maybe like 10 plus years from Earth to the first point. I
I
wish I
thought
had
it
the
was
names
11
pulled up.
years, yeah, from Seoul to, yeah, his first spot that he's supposed to be at
Hmm.
where Bill sets up his skunk works.
Yes, yes. I really enjoy Bill, and I like how you know Dennis E. Taylor uses the excuse with something to do with his hardware that kind of piques his interest when he was pinging um, to
Or,
use
yeah,
him to
what's the word?
they use him to be that
Sudar.
kind of like hmm.
Yeah, his Sudar readings are very
Yes,
diffuse, and
yes.
something so simple like that, he's able to engineering. He's able to figure out other ways of using it, and that's where every time there's a new clone made,
Hmm.
it
Not clone, copy,
or every
because I
time
think
there's a
he
new copy made,
right, right.
it's a restore from that point, and then whatever environmental pressures are hitting seems to be how they diverge or which direction they go off. At the very beginning there, the first cohort, he's just been attacked.
Mm,
He's has uncontrolled freedoms. He's done his job
yeah.
and all these other things. You get to see the side of him where, with all this extra, he clams up. So you get to see Mario, and Mario's like, I'm done with this. I'm gone.
Right.
Bill has the poor emitter, and he's
Mm,
like, that piques his interest to where that was his undergrad, or he almost majored in that field
right.
anyway. So that
Right.
that simple act really sparks which way they're going. There's a part of him that's concerned about the former humanity of everything, so Riker
Right.
goes back. Then
Right.
you get the other side. I can't remember the guy's name, but where he was just shot at missiles, and Riker's like, "Hey, so and so, do you want to take a trip?" And he's like, "Go back into missile range? No,
I
thanks." So you
think
kind
it's
of get
Milo.
everything that's built up to that point
Mm-hmm.
expressed in an individual person or individual replicant.
Right. Right. And he goes through those questions, Bob does, of just like different sides of his persona. Um, Rick says Bill is the best Bob, and I wanted to bring this up later, but we could visit it now. Bill is definitely one of my favorites, but who's your favorite Bob, Pete?
Oh, my favorite Bob would have to be original, just
Mm,
because,
1.0 or
yeah,
2.0?
or I guess 2.5. The
Yeah,
guy
yeah,
who keeps the name Bob,
right,
the
right.
actual Bob, because I enjoy his arc or his thing where he runs into all these situations, and I feel like he still has a lot more of the humanity for like keeping switching tasks and when he finds the Deltons, and yeah, I don't know. I would have to say Bob is my favorite Bob.
Yeah. As far as book one goes, I do enjoy Bob's story arc a lot more just because the Deltons are just so interesting and getting to see that. But I don't quite know if he's my favorite. If I had to pick, I'd probably say I don't know. Homer just brings so much comedic relief to Riker and his story arc, and we only get him uh, for so long, but I almost slipped up. I'm not sure if that happens in book one or not, but yeah, I think out of all the Bobs in book one, Homer is probably my favorite. Uh,
Yeah, Bill being the
yeah,
MVP. Yeah, yeah,
Bill Bill is definitely the MVP because he's not out having all that fun. He definitely does a lot of work for the rest of the Bobs to allow them to go out and get things done.
yeah.
Um,
Between new
the androids,
technology, keeping everyone informed and
yep,
involved, and
yep,
yeah,
yep, helping found BobNet. Um, Bob's not full of himself at all. Slash sarcasm. Um, but yeah, Bob definitely carries the group in a
or
lot of
Bill.
ways. Or Bill, yeah, thank you. Bill carries the group in a lot of ways. Uh, I enjoy getting to see Riker and Homer's storyline going back and just seeing what's left of humanity. Um, Again, the sci-fi of like what ifs, post-apocalypse. Uh, for Earth is fragile. It really doesn't take much. So to kind of get to see just the survival um, of
For
humanity and just how Riker has to navigate and work his way through all the different politics there, and it's funny how like even at the end of Earth's final dying days what politicians can still fight about, and I think it's very real. I'm sure if we found ourselves in similar situations, the politicians would find excuses to go on long, flowery speeches and whatnot over every little thing. Um, but yeah, let us know if you're watching this after the live stream in the comments below who your favorite Bob is and why, or even just favorite character. We do follow a lot of Bobs, but is it General Butterworth's? He's a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah, I guess
Um,
that's true.
yeah, and Ray Porter does a good job in the audiobook with some of the accents. We most of it is Bob, and you get to hear the different Bobs. But yeah, yeah.
And then for me, like, I am glad that Dennis included Riker's thing, and the fact that we got by the end of the book we get him off Earth. But that was
Mm,
by far my least favorite arc. Like, I got into a
really?
sci-fi for, you know, meeting new alien life and
Okay.
creating super, tech for like the lightsaber in a bottle, when
Uh,
they get that. And, it could have used more action for me. But yeah, Riker, like, uh, there's too many times I just wanted him to drop rocks on it and be done with it. Like,
he he was tempted, and I think Homer really played up the humor side of it just to try to help balance him out a little bit because Riker gets to that point a couple times where how's he say it, like I could pick up my ball and go home or whatever at any time.
yeah, they're doing the conference. One of the guys is like, "Why do you care? You have no skin in this game." And he's like, "All right, put it to a vote. If you vote me
Right,
out, I'll pick up my football and go home."
right,
And then
right.
they're like, we can't do Jack without you." It's like, yeah,
But the politicians aren't afraid to try to bully him, right, or blackmail him, or when Faith finds out that they can't just rely on the code that's supposed to be in there to force him to drop insert catchphrase, do what I say, be a good little servant of the state. um, they break out the family,
yeah.
and like getting to see that, going back to the whole would you freeze your brain? Would you not freeze your brain? Would you be okay with them making a copy of you and destroying your brain to where even if the technology advances, they could never truly revive you? I think having a copy of me, with my thoughts, my desires, my goals, to have that, to be able to see my descendants 100 years in the future, like that alone I think would be worth it. And not only for me, because obviously I would be dead, but for your descendants, right? And then to have a copy of me pretty much essentially be immortal. I mean, come
I don't
on.
know how I feel about that because, like, I would think it would be cool for me, but if I look at my grandparents or, some of the other influences who are older, they're not, you know, 200 years down the line or whatever older, but
Right.
you kind of get set in your ways. I don't want to say that I wouldn't be open
Mm-hmm.
minded, and because Bob ended up being captured as a 30-year-old, I
Mm-hmm.
think at that point in my life I'd still be pretty open. But seeing some of these other people who are like, back in my day, or
uh,
get off my lawn kind of moments where it would be
uh
cool to have that influence, but I don't know. Yeah, it's
yeah.
I don't know. It'd be cool for the descendants, but I would have to be it would have to be at a good time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, um, one of the things that I really enjoy about this book, and we're obviously we're geeking out, so we can bring up some of the geeky stuff, is all the geeky references and nerdy nods and Easter eggs that he sprinkles through there. Out of all those, what are some of your favorites from the book?
So, like, I never watched Star Trek, so I didn't get
Okay.
a lot of them,
Okay.
but it added flavor to it. It added
Yeah.
a reason for his desires. Like, as soon as he's, for his first initial launch, he goes by Jupiter? Not,
Yeah.
yeah,
No, Saturn.
Saturn.
I
He
think
goes
it's
by
Saturn.
Saturn, and he takes a bunch of pictures, and he's just geeking out about that. And
Uh-huh.
for when he first becomes a replicant, he's like, "Oh, am I a Borg? Should I ask for a mirror, or
Yeah.
would that be a bad idea?" Even without knowing the reference, it was still just a good way to involve it. So I
Right.
I enjoyed them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I didn't have a good reference for them.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's obvious that he's a Star Trek fan because there
yeah.
was a lot of references there. I mean, Will is number two, which in this TV series he's really number one, and he makes it a point to go through and explain that all through Bob. Um, but you also have the Star Wars. I think one of the later Bobs, I can't remember which one, but he chooses a Battlestar Galactica theme. Um,
Uh,
for me, the simple fact that Guppy is Admiral
yeah.
Akbar, the whole it's a trap. Uh, that's his little Alexa or Google, hello, like Guppy, take a note for me. Um, yeah. Rick says many of the arcs are basically common Star Trek tropes.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Like Star Trek's been a minute for me, but yeah, he pretty much names the Deltons area. No, is it the Deltons area or is it a different one where he names them Romulus and
Yeah, that's a different area. That's
okay,
I
okay.
forget the Bob, but he goes off and he
Yeah,
finds
that's
the
the
area.
colony, right?
I'm sorry.
That's the first colony area.
Yeah, that's where we end up at the very end of the book where they're asking Butterworth and they're like, "Hey, so Vulcan or Romulus?"
Mm-hmm.
And you get that snark back from Guppy where he's like, "Mission parameters do not provide or allow you
Yeah,
to name planets," and he's like, "I found them. I'm gonna do it. Anyone else can do it or change it if they so desire." But
right.
Riker gets a two or factions on planet. Yeah,
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So there's a lot of really good Easter eggs in there for geek fans, of the Star Trek, of the Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica, um, all sorts of different movie references early on when he's talking to Landers. Uh, there's just a lot of good stuff in there, and yeah, I think it's pretty common for authors for a lot of their main characters, especially early on, to be reflective of themselves in a lot of ways. So I think it's safe to say that Dennis E. Taylor is just as big of a geek as Bob is in the story.
yeah.
So, um, but yeah.
Not nearly enough combat, but that's not what it's for. So
Well, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but in the series there is some, but book one is very much setting the stage,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And helping save humanity and spread them out to where all their eggs are not in one basket, right? Which it's important. The Earth is dying, um, and there in book one, we're really facing the challenge of okay, like we only have so much time before it's uninhabitable. Like we're dealing with food shortages, we're dealing with everything, and it's what's the big quote? 1,500 ships or
or
1,500 trips,
yeah.
and there's just no way.
But that brings back to Homer. You know, he is the comic relief, but at the same time, because he doesn't have to deal with all those people, he can dedicate time to other things, and he gets the farm or ranch donuts, as I call them, the space version of their farming industry going.
Yeah, yeah. And Homer wouldn't let that go. Like he kept thinking there had to be a way. Um, and they made it happen. But but yeah, but yeah.
And the
Man,
way,
Rick, you need to join us on some more geek outs, man. You are hitting some excellent points, and we appreciate you contributing. Um, but yeah, what are some other things you really enjoyed about the book, Pete
so
and Rick and everybody in chat?
the fact that every element has a purpose, if it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, it adds to it later. Like for
Okay.
me, when Mario was like, "Oh, I don't want to live in the suburbs," or "I'm going out here," I was just kind of like, "Okay," and he's dead. You know, like I wrote him off, and maybe that's not the correct approach. But then towards the end, he finds, he gets to a planet and there's no metal, and I started going like, "There's no metal, huh?" Like he's as far away as far can be. All the
Mm-hmm.
other people on Earth or on Sol are going in different directions, trying to claim something close. So
Mm-hmm.
yet again, I into the sci-fi for that first contact or that other element. So,
Right.
and
Right.
then you kind of see him work through it where he's like, huh, he's like, oh, Madiri or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not. And so we don't get to see
Right.
a conclusion to it, but the fact that, you know, I wrote him off as dead
Mm-hmm.
at the beginning, but then he comes back and there's some other elements, and then he's stuck between a rock and a hard place because he needs to send it back to Bill, but there's no metal, so he can't build a space station to get it
Mm-hmm.
back to Bill. So it's got its own conflict. I'm trying to think of another good like because of this or connectal cause.
Yeah. I just thinking through that, I think that scene there, early on, Bob really starts working on trying to upgrade his rig, right? As
Yeah.
all, software programmer geeks do. You're always about upgrading your current system, trying to get more memory, trying to get more of this, that, and the other. But by doing so, he allows Guppy to develop into almost like his own individual, right? And I think like we go through a lot of this philosophical questions about, is Bob, you know,
Alive or real or
sentient or whatnot? Is he quote alive? Like, yeah, he's a digital construct, but he's a copy of what was once a living person. And so we were able to go and kind of work through that with the Bobs throughout the book. But what about Guppy in his own right? Right? Like
yeah, that, and
towards the
there's
end of, I believe, book one, he's no longer just this rote, sarcastic um, fish, Admiral Akbar, where it's just query response, query response, query response. He starts giving you um, this additional sarcasm, but he starts initiating, he starts volunteering information. And was it Mario that went out there, and we kind of get to see that a little bit more in
yeah,
book one, where his Guppy is that much more flippant and sarcastic and just kind of has his own personality. And I wonder, dream maybe that we explore this a little bit further in the later books 4 and 5 about like, okay, like, yeah, he's a copy of a person. Okay, you've sold me that he's his own individual, but what about Guppy and all the different Bobs and their Guppies? In addition to like all these other different digital constructs, right? Are they sentient? Are they their own individuals? Yeah, there's just
So,
so many
couple
different ways to go
comments
about
on
it.
that is like not only has Guppy started developing in his own way, each iteration of Guppy has different, parameters that he's within. Because, like you're
Mm-hmm.
saying, Mario finds that, place with no metal, and he's
Mm-hmm.
like, anomaly detected. Isn't this anomalous enough? And he's like, a double plus anomaly, you know. So, anyway, each one has its own iteration so that they could diverge differently. The one that got me was in the beginning the AMI robots that Bob's programming, and so that they can do tasks. Landers talks about how they can only do specific things because there's an instance where pest control robots decided that people were, needed to be purged or whatever. And that's something where, like, he's built a lot of them, he utilizes them a lot. That was the next thing I was thinking was going to happen because, just like with Bill's bad emitter readings, one of the AMIs that he builds for the roamers,
Mm-hmm.
ends up not having similar constraints or quantum effects.
Yeah.
That's where, I'd be excited to see that, but at the same time, that one is a pure AI, kind of
Mm,
like
yeah.
Guppy.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, it's a decent sized book and I enjoy it, but we really could have done so much more. Like as Rick brought up, like Bill's the MVP. Like you could have almost done a whole book just from Bill's perspective, right? And his research and just like all this stuff. And the same thing with Bob and the Deltons. There's just so much there that you could have really stopped and smell the roses and experienced that. And gosh, we just brushed over it, but the Deltons, right? Like first contact and just um, all those ethical questions that again he references Star Trek, like what is it? Remember
Yeah,
the
I
Prime
remember the Prime
Directive?
Directive.
Yeah, yeah, like don't interfere, et cetera, et cetera. If I was in Bob's shoes, I think I would have intervened. Like he pretty much calls it out like Prime Directive, like whatever. Uh, I'm going to get involved. I'm not just going to sit here and watch these, what could be the only other sentient beings out there die, right? Like,
Yeah,
I don't know. Would you
and
have done any different, Pete?
I think I would have gotten involved, but it's kind of weird for me where this whole time we're expanding and we're seeing more worlds and we're doing
Mm,
more things, and
mm-hmm,
then Bob gets there and he just dials in and he's all about this Delton, and I forget how many they said they had for when they start going back to their new home or whatnot, or their old home, for the Flint source, and
mm,
it's a small population,
mm-hmm,
but he just ends up so dialed in, and we get a bunch of random instances like there's a leopardoid, or he's not going to call it a leopardoid, coming
right,
out
right.
that, like, I probably wouldn't have jumped on the first thing. I was really
Okay,
excited about it. I probably would have helped, but understanding more, I feel like
right.
that he's a little too dialed in. But he does
E-
have other Bobs there too. You know,
Right.
there's a moment where something happened, or the first Grilloid attack, and he's like, "Oh, well, that jives with what I've been seeing. I've seen a lot of corpses. I've seen a lot of this, and
Mm-hmm,
that's
mm-hmm,
how we know where the Flint came from." And
right.
I don't know. There's other Bobs there, but I wish he, yeah,
He he does his job as a von Neumann probe when he gets there, right? Like he drags his feet, and we get to see that conflict. But he does make copies of himself. He does, um, you know, make more. And of course, now that I'm thinking through it, like just with the names, there's so many references. We get a DBZ reference. I think there's a Bob that's a Goku.
Yeah, Calvin and Goku.
Um, was there a Calvin and Hobbes at some point?
Or
Maybe.
no, that's when they're butting heads, and it's like, oh
Uh,
well, maybe you can make yourself a Dilbert. Oh well, maybe you
uh,
can make yourself a Hobbs.
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah. So
that's just
just
the
so,
banter.
yeah, so many Easter eggs there.
And then we got like
But
a Bender, which makes me think of like Futurama.
yes, yes, very appropriate for this series. Um, but yeah, I wouldn't be able to sit by, but I think Bob, by making those copies and knowing that everybody else is doing those things, he lets himself just kind of bury himself in his work, right? Because he talks about being a workaholic, so he finds these Deltans, the first species, and just goes all in and tunes out a lot of the other issues going on with the quote Bobiverse, right?
Yeah, and the thing that kind of is what it is. From Bob 1.0 to 2.0 to restored from a backup to
Mm,
defeating Madiri, and now that he's building his first cohort, he goes into a new machine or he gets himself an upgrade. And
right.
throughout those iterations, I feel like maybe it's just what we're focusing on with the writing, but his personality kind of twigs or kind of changes direction because in
Oh,
2.0 he talks about how ooh I'm data, my desire to focus on skill or focus on projects was legendary while I was alive, but now I'm a computer, and the only
mm-hmm.
thing to his humanity was that he has to continue to switch tasks to keep he can't
I'm not getting
focus
bored.
too much on one task. But now
Right.
that it's his third or fourth iteration, he's Bob, but I don't see a whole lot of switching tasks. He's kind of dialed in, so it might just be his legendary, being able to focus on a task. But for me, like his character changed to where he doesn't switch tasks at a lot at that point.
That's that's a good point. They bring it to the forefront with making copies of other Bobs, but yeah, he's a Bob quote that we know later in the book is copy of a copy of a copy. But then at his first stop, Epsilon Aridity, he goes to um, was it the what they call the ships, the Heaven 2.0 or whatnot.
Yeah.
I find it hilarious how Faith is just obsessed with all their
Oh
acronyms
man, I
and whatnot. Like they're so bad sometimes they're almost painful. Um, but yeah, but yeah, it we get a little bit of everything in the book one. Back at Earth with the Deltans, the exploration, getting to see the whole big universe as a whole. Like you said, not a whole lot of action, but there's some, right?
yeah
Like
yeah
there's the
there's
conflicts with
a couple
Maduro,
fights.
um, but the fights are relatively short. Um, I, I
It's
remember one of the things. So he turns off the what's it called? The X.
endocrine controls.
Right, right. He turns that off in the beginning, uh, and he refuses to turn it on with those fights. Um, it was something I kind of caught myself asking myself, would I take advantage of it or not? Right? Because he's not a military guy, right? So I was kind of shocked that granted, he was so against it in the beginning, um, that he didn't take advantage of being able to damper his emotions and damper his anxiety, right? Because he's the personality type, and he even talks about it that his anxiety can get to the point where it's crippling, right? So I don't know. Would you be tempted to use it in like a battle like combat? scenario just so you could have that calm and collected demeanor, or do you think you would um, leave it off and let it go?
I'm not 100%. I could see value out of both.
Mm-hmm.
And in those kind of situations, I feel it would be, it's very fast paced. So things will be always changing and developing. So having that clear, concise, not having to deal with the extra emotional stuff could help.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
then, like, with the whole back to, humanity bit, he did it once for the very first fight with Madiri,
I'm
but
not sure if he did.
yeah,
I might be
he turned
misremembering
him
that.
off. He had his good cry. He
Uh-huh.
was reading Art of War and wanted to, get inspired and whatnot. But then he hit a point and he was like, "Oh, so, with I forget how he says it, but essentially he's against it. He didn't think he would need it, but then he's like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a military person. So then he turns it back on. He deals with Madiri, and then I remember because after the fight's over, he turns it off, and he's a mess, and he's slouching in his
Mm-hmm.
chair like a teenager or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the only time it goes on and off, and I think he leaves it off for when he develops the first round of Bob, so everybody else has it off.
I might be misremembering, but maybe he waits until after that experience and then turns it off and
Or
leaves it
he,
off because I don't think he turns it back on. But yeah, yeah, I could be wrong on that. I could be wrong. But let's see. Rick says he only turned it off the one time he decided to wait until the first fight was over, knowing it was on the horizon. So,
I still think he turned it off once before. So, because he had his two moments where the first one he broke down and was remembering his family and was
mm,
remembering his humanity and was like,
hmm
"Oh yeah, I am human." And then he was coming up to the fight and he turned it on so he could deal with the fight. Turned it back off after the fight and was like, "Oh my god, I just killed someone."
okay, okay. So yeah.
But anyway, it's yeah, the battles of if he's human or not, all the AIs and everyone else
hmm
who could develop.
Right, right.
So also, I wish they stopped to smell the roses more. Any of these iterations could have been their own story,
Uh-huh.
but due to time travel and Einstein, I'm glad the way Dennis brought it all together. And I said
hmm
that in the review where, oh, hey, I'm going to go do this due to space travel and blah, come over here. Oh, time has
hmm
passed, come over here. So it made
Right.
sense in that instance.
Yeah.
But yeah.
He does a good job helping us keep track of what's going on too, right? Breaking the chapters down by which story arc we're following
Yeah.
and the year. Um, because it is all bouncing around.
Yep.
So it's truly an amazing series. When I found out the fact that he was going to be adding two more books to it, I was so excited. I can't wait to see what he does with it. The Yeah, gotta bite my tongue before I go and do spoilers on
I,
book 2 and 3. We'll
yes.
get to those in future geek outs. Keep an eye on our calendar on geekonmysleeve.com. We will get to books 2 and 3. Um, Good
Well,
point.
you
Good
have
point.
infinite bots. And with that being said, any of those, like, oh, what do they call them? It's like A or OA something where a different author does stuff in the same realm, but it's like a
Mm,
side quest.
yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, um, lost my train of thought.
Let's see. We talked about different story arcs, talking about all our geeky references. Um, all the different bobs. Yeah, yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff. Um, watched an interview with Dennis E. Taylor, and I don't the vibe I got is he's going to keep writing as long as people are interested in his stuff. So who knows? Maybe he comes back after books 4 and 5 and smells the roses a little bit with some of these guys. It fleshes out the story a little bit more. Um, but yeah, any other points you want to hit on book one, Pete?
Mm, I'm glad the way it ended, where we're bringing all of humanity to one planet,
Mm-hmm.
because kind of like how they're all at each other's throat and have such different ideals. I don't want it to be like, Darwin's Islands or whatnot. Or maybe I'm
Gilligan's Island.
where there's a bunch of islands that are close together, but each
Oh,
of the animals adapts into a different thing.
mm,
I
anyway,
can't think of it. It's gonna bug me though. I'm glad
yeah,
we put them all on one spot. That way they can continue to deal with their differences as it happens, versus
yeah.
them going off, being different, developing, and now, instead of it being like, oh, I dropped a nuke on this place, it's like, and now I've got my Death Star and I'm gonna blow your planet up. But
Get the
that's
Star
a
Wars
side
reference in.
side tangent.
Yeah, it it ends well. Book one. I think we talked about it in the review that it definitely feels like a sharp cut. In a
Yeah.
lot of ways. Um, but yeah, yeah. If memory serves, book two picks up. Is that I think Rick's got you covered there in chat, Pete. Is that what you're referencing?
Darwin's, finches, Galapagos. Okay, so yeah, we were both right. It's the Darwin thing, and for the finches, there's different plants on each of the islands. So one
Mm.
of them needs more of a sharp beak or like a pointed beak to open up the seeds to get to it, and the other one needs
Oh,
more of like a rounded beak or whatnot. And
oh, okay.
so they're the same species, but it's developed and due to environmental things. Yeah. So as humans with different factions and whatnot, I don't know so much for the biology, but for the ideals,
Yeah,
it would be like that.
yeah. It's good stuff. Good stuff. So yeah, yeah. We plan to do some spoiler-free book reviews of the other two books that Dennis E. Taylor currently has out for this series. I have not read all of his books, but he also has some good standalones. Singularity Trap, which is amazing. If there's some interest there, we'll probably do a spoiler-free review of that as well, and would be down to do a geek out session for it. Um,
Sunday,
next
Sunday, Sunday.
Sunday,
We'll give
Sunday,
you the whole
Sunday.
seat, but you'll only need the edge. Just
Yeah.
kidding. You have your own seat. But for next Sunday, we have in the pipelines doing Dungeon Born Book 2, Dungeon Madness, I believe.
Hmm.
We'll be having John Hopkins back in for that one. So, live stream Sunday
Yep.
for
Yep.
Dungeon
And
Madness.
as always, we're looking for more people to join us in these live streams and collaborate. Feel free to reach out to us, contact us through the different mediums listed below in the description. Appreciate everybody who contributed in chat and helped us keep the discussion going. And yeah, we hope to geek out with you guys next Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern.
And every Sunday for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
That's
Thanks,
that's the
guys.
plan. Bye.
Bye.